The warp-forged palace heaved with obscene life. Sinewy, gore-wet flesh surged from grates and valves, strung through with sparking wires, glowing eye lenses, and gnashing metal fangs. Roadways cracked down their middles, then yawned open like mile-long trapdoors, spilling battling warriors and vehicles down into furnace pits where cogs gnashed and piston-driven crushers pulverized metal, flesh, and souls. High overhead, the arachnoid spines creaked into motion, their tips curled down and inward like the mandibles of a vast insectile maw. Gunships and flying demon engines were smashed from the air by the descending masses of metal and muscle. Shadows pooled about doomed combatants who looked up in despair before they were crushed. Through it all, battled Angron and the Lion. 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀 was disgusted by his former brother's hideous form. Contemptuous of the monster Angron had made of himself, yet he did not underestimate the supernatural might that dark apotheosis had granted the demon Primarch. The Lion fought with every iota of skill he possessed, channeling all the lessons he had ever learned about combating wild and warp-tainted beasts. For his part, Angron felt little beyond the furious pounding of the butcher's nails. He dimly recognized the Lion, but 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀 was just another foe to be slain. An eternity of unending rage and hate had blunted the Red Angel's capacity to revile one enemy more than any other. Angron would take his once brother's head for corn, just as he had taken those of so many of the Lion's gene sons already this day. The two demigods fought their way across a mechanical plateau, where piston columns pounded maniacally, and jets of white-hot flame erupted from hidden apertures. Angron sought to lop 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀's head from his shoulders, but fealty was there to block the blow. Samniarius rebounded again from the Emperor's shield, and as the shockwave drove Angron back, the Lion seized the chance to duck around a pummeling row of pistons and gain some space. Angron dropped his head and bawled straight through the slabs of machinery. He bellowed as he wrenched aside sparking mechanisms and hacked apart steel-braided sinew, only to recoil as the Lion smashed the Emperor's shield into his face. 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀 retreated again, a strategy cohering in his mind as he clattered down a spiraling brass stairway. He was gaining a sense of his foe. Angron was a devastatingly powerful and unrelenting enemy, but the Lion thought he knew how he might defeat his former brother. His train of thought was disrupted as the stairway gave a violent lurch. Looking up, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀 saw Angron had taken to the air, letting his weapons dangle from their chain manacles as he grasped the stairway's superstructure, then wrenched the entire edifice away from the side of the mechanical plateau. With an oath, the Lion leapt clear as the spiral stair buckled under its own weight and collapsed. He dropped, cloak rippling behind him, and landed atop the roof of a Gothic ruin. Despite the tumorous masses of biotechnology that grew from it, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀 felt a horrible sense of familiarity as he glanced around the crumbling rooftop and saw the hooded statues that dotted it. He did not know precisely what this structure had been, but he recognized the architectural style of Caliban before Imperial compliance. The Lion had no time for bitter reflection. Angron fell upon him like a roaring thunderbolt, spat from the skies of dancing flame. The Primarch's weapons clashed and clashed again as the Lion gave ground before his enemy's brutal onslaught. Lost to rage Angron might have been, but hard-wired instinct coupled with the dark gifts of his patron god, lent him tremendous martial skill. Unleashing a flurry of blows upon the lion, he forced open a gap in his opponent's guard before landing a kick to 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀's chest that cracked his armor and threw him through a statue with punishing force. Sensing what was coming next, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀 kept rolling even as Angron's axe slammed into the rooftop where he'd been a split second before. Reaching the roof's edge, the lion threw himself out into thin air and dropped onto a tilted metal platform some 30 feet below. He rolled with the impact and came up in a guard stance, shooting a quick look at his surroundings as he did so. The sight that greeted him was a surreal one. This region of the 𝗟𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗀 palace appeared to have contorted atop vast, unseen gimbals, though what had been a flat plane of riveted metal plates had now become a treacherous landscape of steeply angled ramps. Crackling energy pylons thrust skyward from between the crooked plates. It looked as though loyalist and heretic war engines had been dueling here before the cataclysmic awakening of the planet began. Dark Angels and World Eater battle tanks lay helpless where they'd been hurled onto their roofs, or blazed where they'd been smashed together, or had slid into contact with the lightning-wreathed pylons. 4 tanks and a handful of staggering Chaos Knights were still mobile. Some crews looked to be falling back, trying to maneuver their vehicles onto more stable ground. Others, prizing hatred or vengeance, even over life, fought on as best they could, even as their war engines slid inexorably towards oblivion. Angron swooped from atop the Gothic ruin and fell upon the lion again. This time, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀 was prepared. Dropping to one knee, he raised the Emperor's shield and caught the full force of Angron's meteoric descent upon it. Golden energy erupted in a tremendous shockwave, and the Red Angel was hurled back to smash down amidst the precariously battling war machines. If the lion had expected a moment's respite from this gambit, he was disappointed. Angron rose with an incensed howl and hurled a World Eater's predator towards the lion with an underhand swing of his axe. Seeing the improbable projectile coming, 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀 dove aside. However, he was not quick enough to avoid the next tank, a Dark Angel's impulsor that Angron sent slamming and bouncing end over end in his direction. The vehicle hit the lion and smashed him back into the wall of the Gothic ruin, hard enough to crater the stonework. Angron held and charged, beating his wings to give himself more impetus. Blooded and in pain, but knowing he had moments to act, the lion heaved aside the crumpled wreck of the impulsor and leapt atop it. He spared a moment for his gene sons, slain within the ruined vehicle, and anger smouldered within him. Angron leapt to strike, and the lion dove aside, leaping away from the wreck and hammering the Emperor's shield into the back of Angron's skull as he went. Propelled forward by the blow, the Red Angel smashed headlong into the ruin and was buried in an avalanche of rubble as the wall came down upon him. 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀 backed swiftly away, limping slightly, dimly aware of tanks still dueling around him, even as he kept his attention on the rubble heap. He knew Angron could not be so easily defeated, but he hoped at least to have wounded his former brother. If nothing else, the ignominy of being buried alive would have stoked Angron's fury to new heights, something the lion was counting on. The rubble heap erupted. Flaming chunks of masonry rocketed through the air, several striking tanks with the force of wrecking balls. Angron came at the lion in a red blur, eyes blazing hate, weapons swinging wildly. So sudden and ferocious was the assault that even 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀 could not react in time. He managed to bring the Emperor's shield up between himself and Angron, but the angle was poor, and the titanic discharge of energy threw him backwards as violently as his foe. The ground fell away beneath the lion as he tumbled back, then down, into the fume-wreathed gulfs beneath the tilted platforms. Angron bellowed a war cry and plunged after him.